Welcome to the coaching game. I'm Laurie Lawson, and tonight my guest is Barbara Kenyon. Barbara, welcome, welcome. Barbara and I met on Zoom, and oddly enough, we are now able to take the show on Zoom. And I just was fascinated with her background. So we're going to talk a little bit of, she's got two different careers going here. We're going to talk about the one that bonded us together, kind of. But Barbara, welcome. Tell us a little bit about how you got into coaching in the first place.
Thanks, Laurie, for having me on your show. As I always tell people, I always think coaches are made, they're not born. But in my situation, I feel like I'm the exception. I feel like I was the one who was born. I was the person for as long as I can remember who was safe on the playground for children to share their deepest, darkest stories with. But not only that, but as I mentioned once before, I inherited my mother's Dr. Phil approach to life, where when anybody would share a big, heavy story, she'd say, well, how's that working for you? And typically it wasn't working that well. And my mother would say, well, what are you going to do about it? And I inherited that personality. So that's when my coaching career began, on the playground as a child.
Well, I won't ask you how many years ago that was, because that would be rude. Yeah, but good for you. That's so funny because I always say that coaching calls who it wants, and that's kind of what happened to me. But it called you at a very young age, so good for it. And she has a Kenyon Coaching. Her partner is her husband, but we're going to talk about it, and they help you break through barriers. And we'll probably have her on the show for another, to tell you how to do that. But tell us about the Widows Dating Coach that you are, and how did that come about?
It's a sad story of how that came to be. I was married to my beautiful husband for 9 years. And when our son was only 4 months old, my husband died from pancreatic cancer. And that was, of course, a very dark time in my life. I didn't sign up to be a parent as a single parent, and it was just dark all the way around. After a few years of being widowed and being that single mom, I decided that I wanted to remarry, and I really wanted a daughter as well, kind of in that order. And nobody was showing up at my door, no eligible bachelor, except that UPS guy. That wasn't my time.
Yeah, because usually married anyway. Yeah,
exactly. And that was quite a long time ago. It was actually 30 plus years ago. Internet dating was not an option at that time. So I needed to be creative. And I decided the best way to be that was to network with every wonderful friend that I had and that I had ever met around the country and beyond. So I didn't want to, I wasn't a drinker, so I didn't want to meet somebody at a bar. And so consequently, I networked with everybody. And after 5 years of widowhood, I married my husband, Alan. And for the last 30 plus years, I've been helping widows and widowers do the same thing that I did. It evolved into a joyous, joyous career. And nothing gives me greater joy than helping widows and widowers find true love again.
I was going to ask you, that does include men and women, right?
It does.
Well, before you guys tune out, let me just say, because this is fascinating to me, and especially sadly during the time of COVID, many people have lost many important people in their lives. But I also, because we're all kind of stuck in and isolating, so to speak, I asked Barbara if she could expand that to, how do you date today at all, but so I know, because the way we bonded was I've been widowed twice too. And that's how we kind of started talking. And I know the first time, both of them sucked. No kidding about any of that. But the first time I kind of Prozac'd it through and therapied it through. And luckily after a year, some lovely gentleman rescued me, and I was taken out after he died. I said, there's a whole different way to do this, and it can be more positive and can be more non-harmful to me. So I wanted Barbara to share with us, how do you deal with all those conflicting emotions and changes and, oh my goodness, ups and downs? What's your strategy for helping widows and widowers get through Traumatic time, so traumatic.
I remember when I was widowed, and by the way, Laurie, that's a really good question because it affects so many of us, and particularly now during COVID-19, which is rampant. After my husband died, I had no skill set for coping with the grief. I had never lost anybody in my life that was close to me, luckily. And I really didn't know how to do this. All I knew was that I had a baby, an infant, that I needed to take care of. And somehow I needed to be strong enough to do that. I had no family around me as well. My parents lived 500 miles away, so they did show up regularly, but it was a day-to-day thing. I went to a therapist, and I am a systems person. I said, give me the formula here for getting through this because I don't know it. And there were not a lot of books on grieving that were written back
I need the
then either.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he said to me, and I said, I'm crying all the time, and most odd hours of the day and night. And I remember one morning I was crying so hard that I did not have the energy to pick my little baby out of the crib. It was just heartbreaking. And he said to me, every time you have those episodes when you are crying your eyes out, pat yourself on the back, because then you know that you are grieving properly. You know, you deal with the grief or the grief will deal with you, is essentially what he said. So I took that message to heart, and I really allowed those feelings to come. And I shared them with people, and I had several really close friends that were helpful. And little by little by little, it's not time. People say time is what makes you better. Well, it isn't time alone that does that. I think you have to do the grief work. And the grief work is to feel the pain and move forward and really come to terms with saying goodbye to the person you lost. And I learned the formula for doing that. I went to various grief support groups, and there are systems that will help people move forward. I know that system.
That's so exciting. Yeah. Because
I know.
like I said, I Prozac the first time, and I quit after a couple of months because it was like, all I would do would increase the dosage, and I'm going, eventually you're gonna have to deal with this, so stop it and go ahead and deal with it. But you know, I still don't feel I did that one correctly, but I did get through it, so that was the goal for me at that point. But so the formula, I don't want you to give away the kitchen sink, but give us a clue, please.
I will give away the kitchen sink because I love giving value. The formula that I learned was, well, actually to feel the pain and not numb yourself up with drugs and so on, because eventually the pain will be waiting for you when the drugs are done, and it doesn't go away that way, unfortunately. I intuitively wrote a letter to my husband on the 1-year anniversary of his death, and I spilled out every feeling and thought that I had. It was more like a manuscript. And I have that today. I have that letter that I wrote today. And I wrote it through tears, of course, and anger and love and every other emotion thrown in the mix. But the formula that I now share with my clients is to write a letter to your husband, not in one sitting and not waiting till you're totally ready, because you may never be totally ready. Just start the page with one word and come back to it and do it until you feel complete. And within that letter, include a thank you to your husband for everything that you feel that he gave you. Include an apology for anything that you feel was left unapologized for.
Just get it.
Ask for forgiveness for anything that was left unforgiven, and then say goodbye.
Wow.
Now that formula, actually, there's a system called the Grief Recovery Handbook or something like that, and it's a variation of that. But that is what I encourage my clients to ultimately do. And when I first present that to clients who have lost a husband, certainly within the last 2 years, perhaps, it's like, oh, I could never do that. But that's what we work through, because as I said, you deal with those feelings, or those feelings will deal with you, the grief. And it's important to be able to move beyond. And I always tell widows who want to work with me, they say, how will I know when I'm ready? And I said, well, I go with the 80-20 rule of life. If you feel like you're 80% ready, that's about as good as it gets. And I think the real determining factor is if you can think about your husband, remember the good about him, and remember the stuff that really drove you nuts. and feel like you can put a smile on your face around that. That's when you know you're ready. And I've met a lot of widows in my day that have put their late husband on a pedestal. And every year he gets a little higher and a little higher and a little higher. And 10 years later, that guy on the pedestal isn't even remotely close to the guy that died.
We tend to deitize those people that are no longer here and only remember the good stuff, which in some cases I'm sure is marvelous, but reality check every now and then for sure.
Exactly. I was that person. I mean, I remember a couple of years after my husband died, my mother, who again was that Dr. Phil personality, how's that working for you? And I was bragging about what a wonderful man Dick Pokrist was. And I was going on and on. And my mother said, well, he wasn't that perfect. He got me between the eyeballs. I didn't expect that coming, but she was right. And that was probably a turning point for me too, to be able to realize, oh yeah, the dirty socks on the floor all the time, the things that annoy wives, they were there too.
Of course, the problem is it goes into perspective once the person has passed away. It's like, who cares about dirty socks? Who cares about any of that? The important thing was, which is great. Now, if we could switch that to the present, oh, hallelujah, would we have a lovely, lovely time with anyone we were involved with. But
that Laurie, that is such a good point. I'm going to jump on that because I've met so many widows who said, I would kill to trip over those dirty socks. I would kill. Fast forward 5 years later, they're married. And I said, how does your new husband leave dirty socks on the floor? And yes, and it's so annoying. Oh, there it is.
Learn, maybe not.
We deal with what is.
Yes, you do. Let me ask you, I know you at one point had an ebook called After Widowhood. Is that still available?
It is available on my website, widowsdatingcoach.com. You click on there, you can gain access to that, and it's full of my best tips for moving forward after widowhood.
Fantastic. Okay, so we'll give them your website again before the show is over. So I would say that in broadening this a little, what would you say? How do we deal with this now when physical contact is not always available? It's like preferably not available at this point. How has dating changed, and what impact has that had on widowhood?
That is a really good question, and it has changed a lot, mostly for the bad, but in a few points for the good. I'll share both. When usually the old formula of dating was to meet somebody either through a friend or an online and have a call or two and then meet in person. That was the system. With COVID-19 around, we're not doing that anymore. We have to be way more creative. And people have contacted me and said, is this the best time to be thinking about finding true love? Probably not, correct? I said, actually, there's probably been no better time than now. And I'll tell you why. Because we have new rules and you have a chance to really get to know the person using Zoom or FaceTime. And you can filter out the good and the bad right off the bat by having in-depth conversations. Now, two of the things that widows worry about are, who's going to pay for the dinner when I go out? Should I pay? Should he pay? Should I let him pay? What should I do around that? Not an issue with COVID-19. You're not going out for dinner. It's a non-issue. The other thing that I hear widows talk about all the time is the word cellulite. And the whole sexuality thing is of concern. People, especially when they've been married for 50 years and they haven't really dated anybody before their late husband, and the thought of dating again, just in general, is so overwhelming that they freeze. But yet they recognize that they do not want to spend the rest of their life alone. So, and trying to come to terms with that, especially during COVID, I said, you're not having a sexual relationship with anybody. Don't even give that a thought. And don't worry about cellulite because, from this part up, nobody's seeing that. And then to put it in a bigger perspective is that you're no longer a teenager. And whomever you're dealing with is also not going to be a teenager. And so bodies change and we embrace who we are. That's not the important thing anymore. And believe it or not, that's such a huge relief statement to so many widows. Oh, I hadn't thought about it like that. You're right. Yeah. So in terms of how COVID has changed, now is a perfect time to start developing relationships, meeting people, getting to know them. And it's amazing how quickly you can get to know somebody face to face. You can see in the background if their house is messy. There's so many details that you can learn
Look at
about.
my background.
No, mine is okay.
I want a screen. Yeah.
Exactly. And then in terms of the actual dating during COVID, there are many things that you can do on FaceTime. I'll give you a few examples. Cooking a meal together. That would be a date night where you each buy the ingredients and you have like a little cooking show in each of your homes.
Sounds like fun, actually. Yeah.
Playing a board game. One person makes the moves and you play a board game. Watching a travel series, something on television together. Watching the news and debating that, which is a whole other topic about details of.
Not a good idea right before the election, but
Exactly.
unless you're both of the same party, yeah.
Exactly. And I'm going to kind of segue into that topic because it's important to really be clear about what you want for your life. And that's part of my ebook about how to find true love. In fact, if I would like to jump right into that, if that's okay with you.
I was going to ask you, as a coach, what do you do? Do you hold their hand through grief? What do you do? So I love it. Jump on it.
Well, first of all, I don't help widows to find the true love of their life again until they feel that they've properly handled the grieving process. So if they are in the throes of new grief, that would not be a client for me. Typically, I don't work with somebody who has been widowed less than 2 years because I think it takes that long to turn a lot of corners and be ready. There are a couple of exceptions, but mostly a 2-year window is what I want people to have lived through before they come and work with me.
Okay.
However, there are other exceptions too. If somebody had been married to a man who had a degenerative disease, and so it was one of those slow goodbye kind of things, and they did what I call anticipatory grieving long before he actually died, that would be a little bit of a different matter. But I want to make sure that all the clients that I work with feel that they can put that smile on their face, what I mentioned to you, where they can think about their late husband, the good, the bad, the socks, everything, and be able to move forward with that.
Yeah.
So the first step of my process is helping them gain great clarity of what they want for their lives, not in a man, but for their lives. People have lots of freedom oftentimes when they've been widowed. They can move different places. They can change careers. They can do many, many things, even with COVID.
And that can be very frightening to have all that freedom and just go, oh my gosh, I'm so used to, being a part of a team or being told what to do or whatever. Yeah. Frightening.
That is exactly right. One client that I'm working with right now was married for 50 years, and she said, I was always the co-pilot. My husband was the alpha male driving the vehicle, and so, figuratively, and she is lost on a lot of decisions. She's been widowed several years, but she is lost, and so the freedom is, enticing and scary at the same time. But when you work with a life coach, as you know, you open your eyes to greater possibilities, and that is what she's doing, and she's stepping into that new freedom, and it's quite delicious in some ways. So I help clients get really, really clear. What is it that you wanted to do as a kid, a teenager, a young adult that you never did? Now is the time to be thinking about all of that. That's step number one. Step number two is falling in love with yourself first. If you're not good to yourself, no one else will be either. What does that mean? That means stronger self-care, honoring your needs and wants and desires, how to become your own best friend. Once you feel that you've done that, and that's a big aha moment for a lot of people, they haven't learned how to indulge in that way. They haven't learned how to say no to things that they might feel obligated to say yes to in the past. Setting boundaries, all of that. Once we feel like we've addressed that, then I talk about gaining peace around your husband, your late husband, and that's where I talk about writing the letter to him. And again, that's a process. It doesn't happen immediately. After that, we talk about what do you want in a new man, the must-haves and the deal breakers. Sometimes when clients come to me, in fact, I had one client come to me and had a whole list of deal breakers. And some of those deal breakers are things like, well, I looked on Match.com and there's these guys with these red plaid shirts. Not my type. And I thought, really? Why? What have you got against a red plaid shirt? He said, well, it just sort of resembles, it reflects maybe an interest that I wouldn't be having. I said, let's not be too judgmental about things like that. I said, it's really important in the dating world to cast a wider net and don't eliminate people by the clothes they're wearing unless they're, they look like they just hopped a freight train or something. But nonetheless, you have to be really clear about the red flags. Things like no smoking. I mean, that's an obvious red flag to so many people. It certainly would be at the top of my list. And many other things that are obvious red flags. But those other things, one needs to take a look at a little bit more open-mindedly. Sometimes people who are very well educated come to me and they want nothing less than a master's degree. And I have them take a look at that. Does that master's degree guarantee a really nice guy? I don't think so. And I always say, or so maybe people say, some widows feel that they don't want to become what we call a nurse and a purse. That's an expression that's been thrown around for as long as I've been a widow. Oftentimes they've taken care of their sick husband before. They don't want to do that again. And they want to protect their own financial security. So they don't want the person who's going to take that away from them. And we take a look at that as well. As I always say about money, the best kind of man is the guy who is rich in the ways that money can't buy. The kindness, generosity, the commitment, the consistency, all of those things. Money doesn't guarantee any of that.
I love the self-care part because I was going to ask you about that. It's like, okay, but also what about self-protection? Do you do anything with that? Because the purse part and the nurse part is it could be very disconcerting. And it can also be when you're vulnerable, you could accept things that maybe you wouldn't accept under normal circumstances. Do you do any of that? A little bit of, let's do reality checks here but I think letting people know or figure out what they really want is certainly the first step of that, right?
Absolutely. And yes, it's all about setting boundaries. And a lot of times when women first re-enter the dating arena, having not ever been in it in a big way in their whole life. A lot of times these women have dated one or two guys, married them, end of story. So, I had one gentleman ask me, Barbara, how long is it going to take me to get back into the swing of things? He was my oldest client. He was 82, a retired minister. And I said to him, when were you really ever in the swing of things? He said, I wasn't. I said, well, then it's not getting back. It's about getting into. So, right. And it is about setting boundaries. When women are lonely, they may be willing to tolerate things that otherwise they would not. And we talk all about that before we even think about pursuing a first date. How do you know if you're dating somebody who's right for you? Well, one of the answers is it's easy. It's easy. It doesn't get complicated. If you're dealing with somebody, if you have to second guess, does he like me? Is this going okay? All of that kind of stuff. Probably the answer is no, because if it's right, it should be easy. Now, that's not to say you're not going to have disagreements here and there, but you work them out, you move on, end of story. And I can remember when I was widowed, certainly in the early years of my dating before I met my husband, I was in several relationships over a course of time that weren't easy. And I was so lonely that I thought, well, this guy's, number one, he was a doctor. He's going to take good care of me and my son because he knows so much about medicine and we're in good hands. And well, that was kind of where that relationship ended.
It's so funny because my mother was widowed twice too, so I'm no stranger to death. And I'm like, oh my God, there's a Gene in the family. What's going on here? But my thing was always marry younger because then does not work. You cannot guarantee anything. And I think openness, how to be open and how to, just accept and not have expectations because it didn't work either time for me. It's like, nah, that didn't do it. So the same thing, and it's such practical advice we're getting from Barbara, and I can't see how this information she's giving us can't be applied to general dating. It's like, why not decide what you want before you jump on out there or get on out there or stay out there, whatever.
It's important. Dating is dating, whether you've never been married or you're widowed or you're divorced. It's all the same thing. What do we women want? What do men want? We want really good people. good people that we can really trust and that has our back and can provide nice, sweet pillow talk and all of those wonderful things that understand us. They trust, the trust. That's what we want. A lot of times women will say to me, well, where are those guys? Those guys that are like that, they're not around. They're all married. And you know what, Laurie, I did a few years ago a little research project, and I'd love to share with you the results of that.
Sure.
I had been doing dating coaching for widows for, as I said, for 30 years. And I thought maybe I need to get in touch with widows, just people that I'm not working with, but just to hear what they have to say. So I interviewed a variety of widows across the country. Most of them were 50 or older. And I asked them a variety of questions. And here were the results that I found. The biggest challenge for widows is where to find high quality eligibles. Nobody really enjoys internet dating and that process. They find it discouraging. Very few have tried other means to meet eligibles like speed dating, meetup groups, things like that. The biggest reason that they want to find somebody wonderful in their life, they want the companionship, they want somebody to share their daily life with. They want to go places together. They want intimacy. They don't want to be alone for the rest of their life. Almost all have had bad dates and bad relationships, and they don't want to experience that again. There was a lot of reluctance expressed in pursuing dating just for that very reason. They don't want to revisit that pain. Some women who've been out of the dating scene for quite some time have concerns about their weight and fear that that could be a deal breaker. Some have been in relationships with a guy because he is what I call a BTN, better than nothing. Although they know there's no future to the relationship. I met a variety of people that felt that were in that situation. Either he was already married, he's definitely never interested in marriage, and he's not really their type in a lot of ways, but better than nothing. Several said when they're ready, they'll hire a matchmaker, but every single person that I interviewed who had hired a matchmaker, not one of those met somebody that way.
Isn't that interesting? Barbara, we only have 30 seconds left.
Oh dear. And dating is scary business.
Yes, it is. And thank God you're out there to help people get through it. Oh my goodness. Look up widowsdatingcoach.com and you're going, or if you can't do that, find Barbara Kenyon, Kenyon, and check her out. She's got some great stuff. Get her ebook. Barbara, thank you so much for being a guest. This was wonderful, and I'm sure many people are ready to get out there. Thank you.
My pleasure, Laurie. Thank you.